The morning of November 15th felt electric inside the studio. Camera operators were checking their equipment one last time. Sound technicians adjusted their headphones and fiddled with control panels. Makeup artists rushed around touching up faces under the harsh studio lights. Everyone moved with purpose, but there was something different in the air today. You could feel it in the way people smiled at each other, in the excited whispers between crew members. Today's guest was someone special. Not just another celebrity promoting their latest project, but someone who had earned genuine respect from Hollywood and beyond. Keanu Reeves was coming to the View, and even the most seasoned producers who'd worked with countless A-list stars seemed a little more animated than usual. Whoopi sat at the familiar curved table, cradling her coffee mug with both hands. She'd been doing this show for years, had interviewed presidents and rock stars and everyone in between. But even she seemed curious about today's conversation. She chatted casually with the other hosts, occasionally glancing at her notes, then looking toward the entrance where their guest would soon appear. The audience had been seated for 20 minutes already, and their energy was palpable. People leaned forward in their seats, checking their phones one last time before the show started, whispering to their neighbors about how excited they were. One woman in the third row kept adjusting her glasses nervously. A man near the back couldn't stop grinning. When the stage manager finally gave the signal and Keanu walked onto the set, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The entire audience rose to their feet as one. The applause wasn't polite or measured. It was genuine, thunderous, the kind of reception usually reserved for beloved icons. Keanu stopped for a moment, seeming almost surprised by the warmth of the welcome, and raised his hand in a modest wave. He looked exactly like people expected him to look, which is to say completely unpretentious. While other celebrities might have shown up in designer outfits worth thousands of dollars, Keanu wore a simple black suit with a dark shirt underneath. No flashy jewelry, no elaborate styling. Just clean, understated, the kind of outfit that said he was there to talk, not to be looked at. But as he moved toward the guest chair and the studio lights hit him at different angles, something did catch the light. A silver chain around his neck and hanging from it a dog tag. Not the kind of fashion accessory some celebrities wear to look edgy. This one looked real, worn like it had been through something. The metal had that particular sheen that comes from being handled constantly, touched by fingers again and again over months or years. Keanu settled into the chair with easy grace, and the audience finally sat back down, though the energy in the room remained charged. He smiled at the hosts, and there was something about that smile that felt different from the practiced grins of so many public figures. It reached his eyes. It seemed real. The interview started exactly the way these things usually do. Questions about his latest movie, about the stunts, about working with the director. Keanu answered thoughtfully, taking his time with each response, never rushing to get to the next soundbite. When he talked about his motorcycle company, his whole face lit up. You could tell this wasn't just a business venture for him. It was something he genuinely loved. One of the hosts asked him about his philosophy on life, and Keanu paused before answering, really considering the question instead of delivering a pre-rehearsed response. "I think we're here to be kind to each other," he said simply. "To help when we can. To remember that everyone's fighting their own battles, you know? We should try to make things a little easier for each other, not harder." The audience murmured in appreciation. Someone in the front row nodded vigorously. This was why people loved him. Not just because he made great movies, but because he seemed genuinely decent in a world that often rewarded the opposite. The conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. Keanu made the audience laugh when he told a self-deprecating story about forgetting his lines on set and having to improvise with increasingly ridiculous dialogue until the director finally called cut. He talked about his love of reading, about how he still got nervous before big scenes even after decades in the business, about the small pleasures in life that kept him grounded. Throughout it all, that dog tag hung visibly around his neck. The cameras caught it occasionally when he gestured or leaned forward. Once or twice, almost unconsciously, his hand drifted up to touch it briefly before falling back to his lap. It was clearly something he wore all the time, not just for the interview. Whoopi had been relatively quiet for the first part of the conversation, letting the other hosts take the lead with their questions, but she'd been watching Keanu closely, and her eyes kept drifting to that dog tag. Anyone who knew Whoopi knew that when something caught her attention like that, she was going to address it. She wasn't one to let things go unmentioned, especially if they seemed interesting or unusual. The interview was about 15 minutes in, when the tone in the room was at its most relaxed and comfortable. Keanu had just finished telling a funny story about his dog, and the audience was still chuckling. Everyone felt at ease. The hosts were smiling. Even the crew members who were supposed to be focusing on their jobs were grinning at each other. That's when Whoopi leaned forward. There was a familiar glint in her eye, that look she got when she was about to say something she found clever or amusing. She was known for her quick wit, for not holding back, for saying the things other people might think but not voice. It was part of her charm, part of why audiences loved her. She kept things real, kept things interesting. "So, Keanu," she started, and something in her tone made a few people in the audience perk up. They sensed something coming, though they couldn't have known what. "I've got to ask you something." Keanu turned to her with that same easy smile, open and receptive. "Sure, go ahead." Whoopi gestured toward his chest, toward the chain and the dog tag that had been catching the light throughout the interview. Her expression was playful, teasing in the way that late-night hosts often are with their guests. "What's going on with the dog tag? Are you trying to give us a Top Gun situation here? Because I hate to tell you this, but Tom Cruise pretty much owns that look." The audience laughed right on cue. It was a good line, the kind of gentle ribbing that usually makes for entertaining television. A few of the other hosts chuckled too, though something in their laughter sounded slightly uncertain, as if they weren't quite sure where this was going. Keanu's expression didn't change dramatically. The smile didn't vanish completely, but something subtle shifted in his eyes, something that might have been easy to miss if you weren't watching closely. His hand came up almost reflexively and his fingers closed around the dog tag. Not in an aggressive way, not protectively exactly, but gently, the way you might touch something precious and fragile. "Actually," he said, and his voice had dropped lower, quieter, in a way that made people instinctively lean forward to hear better. "This belonged to my best friend." The words hung in the air for just a moment. There was something in the way he said them, in that the words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. "This belonged to my best friend." Simple words, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that makes a room feel smaller, heavier somehow. Whoopi, though, didn't catch it at first. Or maybe she caught it but thought the moment called for lightness, for humor, to keep things moving. That was her job, after all. Keep the energy up. Keep people entertained. She'd been doing this for so long that certain responses had become automatic, instinctive. She laughed, and it was her trademark laugh, full and uninhibited. "Oh, okay. So it's like a friendship bracelet kind of deal? That's actually really sweet. I love that. Very best friends forever necklace vibes." She made a gesture with her hands, like she was displaying an imaginary necklace, and a few people in the audience chuckled along with her. But the laughter wasn't quite as loud this time. Something was off. You could feel it spreading through the studio like a cold draft. The other hosts exchanged quick glances, the kind of silent communication that happens between people who work together closely. One of them shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Another looked down at her notes suddenly, as if searching for the next question to ask. Keanu sat very still. He hadn't let go of the dog tag. His fingers remained wrapped around it, and for just a second his eyes weren't focused on Whoopi or the audience or anything in the studio at all. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere the cameras couldn't follow, somewhere in his memory that only he could access. When he spoke again, his voice was even quieter than before. Everyone in the studio, the audience, the hosts, the crew members who'd been moving equipment around, everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. "He died saving my life." 5 words. That's all it took, 5 words to change everything. The laughter stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Not gradually, not fading away naturally, but instantly. Cut off. The silence that followed was profound, the kind you can almost hear like a ringing in your ears. People in the audience froze with smiles still half-formed on their faces. The camera operators stopped adjusting their angles. A production assistant who'd been crossing the floor near the back of the set stopped mid-step. Whoopi's expression transformed completely. The playfulness drained away as if it had never been there at all. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her hand moved toward her chest, hovering there uncertainly. For someone who made her living with words, who always seemed to know what to say, she appeared completely lost. The other hosts looked stricken. One of them covered her mouth with her hand. Another just stared at Keanu with wide eyes, clearly understanding that they'd all just witnessed something going terribly wrong, but not yet knowing how to fix it or where it would lead. Keanu took a slow breath. You could see his chest rise and fall, see him gathering himself for what came next. His thumb moved across the surface of the dog tag, tracing something engraved there that the cameras couldn't quite capture. When he looked up, he looked directly at Whoopi, and there was no anger in his eyes. No accusation. Just a deep, quiet sadness mixed with something else, maybe understanding, maybe resignation. We were filming a movie about 15 years ago, he began, and his voice had that quality that some people's voices get when they're talking about something painful but important. Steady, but with an undercurrent of emotion barely held in check. There was this stunt sequence we were shooting. High-fall stuff, really technical, lots of rigging and cables and precise timing. The studio remained absolutely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not the rustle of clothing. Even the ambient hum of the equipment seemed to fade into the background. Every single person was focused entirely on Keanu's words. Something went wrong with one of the primary cables, he continued. Looking back, there were probably warning signs, small things that got missed in the rush to stay on schedule. That's how accidents happen usually. Not one big mistake, but a bunch of small ones that add up. He paused, and you could see him swallow hard, see the muscles in his jaw tighten slightly. I was supposed to be on that rig. I was getting ready to do the stunt myself. I always try to do as much of my own stunt work as I can. But my friend, he was the stunt coordinator for the film, and something caught his eye. He was looking at the setup and he knew something wasn't right. He had this instinct for these things, could spot problems other people would miss. Keanu's hand tightened around the dog tag, knuckles going slightly white. He told me to wait. Said he wanted to check something himself first. I argued with him. I was in the zone, ready to go, didn't want to break the momentum. But he insisted. He actually put his hand on my chest and physically stopped me from getting into the harness. Keanu touched his own chest as he said this, in the exact spot where his friend's hand must have been all those years ago. So he took my place, clipped into the harness, got lifted up to the starting position. The whole crew was watching, waiting for him to give the all clear so we could proceed. And then he stopped. The pause stretched out, and it was excruciating. You could see people in the audience leaning forward, hardly breathing, dreading what was coming but unable to look away. The cable snapped. Not the backup cables, those held. Just the primary one, but that was enough. He fell 40 feet onto concrete. The impact? Keanu closed his eyes briefly. You could hear it across the whole set. This sound that you know immediately is bad, is wrong, is the kind of sound that changes everything. Someone in the audience made a small, involuntary noise, a gasp, or maybe a sob. Others had tears streaming down their faces. The hosts at the table looked devastated, and Whoopi's face had gone pale. Everyone ran to him, Keanu said. The medics, the crew, everyone. I got there first because I was closest, and I kept thinking this isn't real. This can't be happening. This should be me lying there. When I reached him, he was conscious. Can you imagine? After a fall like that, he was conscious. Keanu's voice caught for the first time, just slightly, but he pushed through. And you know what he did? He tried to smile. He looked up at me and all these people gathered around him, and he made a joke. Said something like, well, I guess that cable wasn't up to code. Trying to make everyone feel better even though he had to know how badly he was hurt. That was just who he was as a person, always thinking about everyone else first, always trying to take care of the people around him. The camera caught a tear sliding down one of the hosts' faces. In the audience, multiple people were openly crying now. Even some of the crew members, hardened professionals who'd seen countless interviews and emotional moments, were visibly affected. The ambulance came fast. We were lucky in that sense. The hospital wasn't far. They got him stabilized enough to transport, and a few of us rode with him. I held his hand the whole way, and he kept squeezing back, letting me know he was still there, still fighting. He was strong, incredibly strong. Everyone kept saying he was going to be okay, that he just needed surgery, that they'd fix him up. Keanu's voice had gotten even quieter, and the silence in the studio made every word crystal clear. But he didn't make it. The words came out flat, final. 3 hours after we got to the hospital, he died. Internal injuries were too severe. The doctors did everything they could, but sometimes everything isn't enough. Keanu looked down at the dog tag in his hand. Really looked at it, like he was seeing it for the first time even though he must have looked at it thousands of times over the years. His wife was there at the end. She'd gotten to the hospital maybe an hour after we did, just dropped everything and rushed over the moment she got the call. I'll never forget her face when she came into that waiting room. The terror in her eyes, but also this determination, like if she could just get to him fast enough, her presence alone would keep him alive. He paused, taking another slow breath. The audience sat frozen, afraid even the smallest movement might shatter whatever spell was holding this moment together. She got to say goodbye to him. We all did. Everyone who'd been on set that day. The doctors let us in a few at a time. When it was my turn, I didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who just took your place, who's dying? Because he saved your life? Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it. I'm sorry doesn't make sense because he chose to do it. Chose to be there instead of me. Keanu's voice had taken on a different quality now. Less about the pain of the memory and more about something deeper. Gratitude, maybe, or a kind of reverent remembrance. I just held his hand and told him I wouldn't waste it. The life he gave me. I promised him I'd try to be worth saving, that I'd try to be the kind of person who deserved a second chance. I don't know if he heard me. He was pretty far gone by then, on a lot of medication for the pain, but I needed to say it anyway. Whoopi had been sitting absolutely still this entire time, and now a tear rolled down her cheek, then another. She didn't bother wiping them away. Her hand was still pressed against her chest, and she looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. The other hosts were in similar states, moved beyond their ability to maintain professional composure. The funeral was 4 days later, Keanu continued. Biggest funeral I've ever been to. He knew everyone, touched so many lives. People flew in from all over the world, stunt performers he'd worked with, actors, directors, crew members. Everyone had stories about him, about his kindness, his skill, his ridiculous sense of humor even in serious situations. A small, sad smile crossed Keanu's face at the memory. His wife asked to speak with me after the service. We went outside away from everyone else and she handed me this. He held up the dog tag, letting it catch the light. She said he'd worn it every single day since his time in the Marines. It had been through everything with him. Combat deployments, training exercises, his entire career in stunts. It was his most precious possession besides his family. Keanu's voice broke slightly on the last word, and he took a moment to compose himself before continuing. I tried to refuse it. I told her it should stay with her, or go to his kids, that it was too important. But she was insistent. She said, and I remember her exact words because they've stayed with me ever since, she said, he'd want you to have it. He saved you for a reason. This way, he'll always be with you, reminding you to live fully, to live bravely, to live the life he can't. The studio was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Even the camera operators were struggling to keep their equipment steady, moved by the raw emotion of the moment. So I took it, and I've worn it every single day since then. When I wake up in the morning, it's the first thing I put on. When I go to bed at night, it's the last thing I touch. It's been with me to movie premieres and motorcycle rides, to quiet dinners alone and big family gatherings, to the highest highs of my career and the lowest lows of my personal life. He turned the dog tag over in his fingers, and the camera zoomed in close enough to catch the engravings on both sides, though they were too worn to read clearly on screen. One side has his name, rank and service number from his time in the military. The other side has a quote he loved. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. He lived by that. Wasn't fearless at all, actually. He was afraid of heights, if you can believe that. A stunt coordinator afraid of heights, but he did the work anyway. Faced that fear every single day because he loved what he did and he loved the people he worked with. Keanu looked up from the dog tag and directly into the camera, and through the camera to everyone watching. I wear this not as a fashion statement, not as some kind of tough guy accessory, but as a reminder that I'm living on borrowed time, that every day I have is a gift that came at the highest possible price, that someone I loved, someone with his own dreams and family and future, gave all of that up so I could keep going. His hand closed around the dog tag again, holding it against his chest. Every morning when I put this on, I ask myself questions. Am I living a life that honors what he did? Am I being kind to people? Am I being brave when bravery is needed? Am I making choices that matter, that help others, that add something positive to the world? Because if I'm not, then what was the point? If I'm just coasting through life, taking it for granted, being careless with this gift I was given, then his sacrifice means nothing. The weight of those words settled over everyone in the studio. You could see people processing what they'd just heard, trying to wrap their minds around the enormity of it. This wasn't just a sad story about a tragedy. This was about how someone chooses to live in the wake of that tragedy, how they transform grief and guilt into purpose and meaning. I think about him constantly, Keanu said. Wonder what he'd think about the choices I've made, the roles I've taken, the way I've tried to live. Sometimes I imagine conversations with him, asking his advice about things even though I know I'll never hear his answer. But somehow just thinking about what he'd say helps me find the right path. He smiled again, and this time there was warmth in it alongside the sadness. He had this thing he used to say on set when things got tense or dangerous. He'd look around at everyone, see the fear on people's faces, and he'd grin and say, "We got this." Just those 3 words. We got this. It sounds simple, maybe even silly, but coming from him it made you believe it. Made you feel like no matter how scary the stunt was, how complex the sequence, how many things could go wrong, you were going to be okay because he was there, because he knew what he was doing, because he believed in the team. Keanu touched the dog tag one more time, then let it rest against his chest. I still say it to myself sometimes when I'm facing something difficult or scary. We got this, because he's still with me in a way. His courage, his kindness, his spirit, those things didn't die on that hospital bed. They live on through everyone he touched, everyone he taught, everyone he saved, including me. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This one felt almost sacred, like the quiet after a prayer or the moment after a symphony ends but before the applause begins. People needed time to absorb what they'd just heard, to process the depth of emotion and meaning in Keanu's words. Whoopi finally found her voice, though it was shaky and thick with emotion. "Keanu, She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. I had no idea. I was just trying to be funny, trying to keep the energy light. And Her voice cracked completely, and she covered her face with her hands for a moment. When she looked up again, her eyes were red and tears were flowing freely. The makeup artist somewhere backstage was probably having a mild crisis, but nobody cared about that right now. This was real, raw human emotion that no amount of professional polish could hide or fix. "There's no excuse for what I said," Whoopi continued. "I should never have mocked something without knowing what it meant to you, without asking first. I've been in this business long enough to know better. I do know better. But I got careless, went for the easy joke instead of the thoughtful question. And I hurt you. I'm so sorry." The other hosts nodded, clearly feeling their own share of discomfort and regret. They'd laughed too, after all. Maybe not as loudly as Whoopi, but they'd participated in the moment added to it. One of them reached out and squeezed Whoopi's arm in solidarity and support. Keanu was quiet for a moment, considering his response. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He leaned forward, reached across the table, and gently placed his hand over Whoopi's where it rested on the table. "It's okay," he said. And there was no resentment in his voice, no lingering anger. "Really, how could you have known? None of you could have known. I don't talk about this publicly. I've mentioned him in a few interviews over the years, but never in detail. Never the full story. It's something I carry privately, close to my heart, because it's too important to turn into just another talking point or soundbite." Whoopi looked at his hand covering hers, then back up at his face, and you could see the gratitude and relief in her expression, mixed with the ongoing remorse. "You were doing your job," Keanu continued. "Keeping things entertaining, making observations, going for laughs. That's what talk shows are supposed to be. And from the outside, yeah, I can see how a dog tag might look like a fashion choice. Lots of people wear them as accessories without any real meaning behind them. You made an assumption based on what you could see, which is all any of us can do most of the time." He sat back slightly, though his hand remained on hers for another moment before returning to his lap. "But maybe, and I'm saying this gently, as someone who's made plenty of his own mistakes, maybe this can be a reminder for all of us. Everyone we meet is carrying something. Grief, trauma, hope, love, memories, things we can't see just by looking at their surface. That necklace someone's wearing might be from their dead grandmother. Those shoes might be the last gift from a parent who's gone. That habit that seems quirky or strange might be a coping mechanism for anxiety or pain we know nothing about. The audience was riveting to his every word. People were nodding, crying, some holding hands with the strangers sitting next to them. This had become something more than entertainment. It had become a shared moment of human connection and understanding. "We live in a world where judgment comes so quickly," Keanu said. "We see something, and within seconds we've formed an opinion about it. Social media has made this even worse. We see a photo, a short video clip, and we think we understand the whole story. We comment, we mock, we share, we pile on, but we rarely have the full picture. We almost never do." Whoopi nodded vigorously, squeezing her eyes shut for a moment as more tears fell. "I'm not saying we need to walk on eggshells around each other," Keanu clarified. "Life's too short for that, and human connection requires some level of casualness, of humor, of taking risks in conversation. But maybe just pause. Ask before assuming. Be curious instead of judgmental. Give people the chance to tell their own stories before we write those stories for them." One of the other hosts spoke up, her voice gentle. "That's beautifully said. And it's such an important reminder. We see someone wearing something or doing something unusual, and our first instinct is often to make fun of it or dismiss it. But behind every choice, every object, every behavior, there might be a story as profound as yours." "Exactly," Keanu agreed. "And even when there isn't a dramatic story, even when someone's just wearing something because they like it, does that make it okay to mock them? Everyone deserves basic respect and dignity. Everyone deserves to exist in their own way without being ridiculed for it. That should be true whether there's a heartbreaking backstory or not." The camera caught someone in the audience wiping their eyes with a tissue. Another person had their hand over their heart. The emotional impact of this moment was rippling through everyone present. "Can I ask?" one of the hosts said carefully. "And please say no if this is too personal. But what was his name?" "The man who saved you?" Keanu smiled. A real smile this time, one filled with warmth and affection despite the sadness. "Tommy Rodriguez. He hated being called Thomas, always corrected people immediately. Tommy. Always Tommy. Tommy Rodriguez," the host repeated softly, and something about hearing the name spoken aloud made him more real, transformed him from an abstract concept into an actual person who'd lived and laughed and loved and died. "He would have been 53 this year," Keanu said. "Would have been teaching at a stunt school he'd been planning to open. He had all these ideas about safer training methods, better equipment protocols. He wanted to revolutionize the industry, make it so accidents like his became impossible. His wife actually took some of his plans and helped implement them through new safety standards. His legacy lives on in ways that go beyond just the people who remember him." Whoopi had composed herself somewhat, though she still looked shaken. "Thank you for sharing him with us. For sharing his story, his name, his impact, and thank you for your grace in how you've handled my thoughtlessness. A lot of people would have gotten up and walked out or called me out harshly, and it would have been deserved. But instead, you've given us all a lesson in compassion and understanding. We all deserve grace," Keanu said simply. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after, how we grow from them, whether we let them teach us something valuable. You can use this as a learning experience, not as a burden you carry around beating yourself up forever. That doesn't help anyone." The interview continued after that, but everything had shifted. The tone was different, deeper, more authentic, stripped of all the usual performance and pretense that often characterizes celebrity interviews. The hosts asked Keanu about how he honors Tommy's memory in his daily life, and he spoke about the foundation he'd quietly established years ago to support stunt performers and their families. "Most people don't realize how dangerous stunt work really is," he explained. "These performers put their bodies on the line to make our movies exciting and believable. They train for years, take incredible risks, and often don't get the recognition they deserve. When something goes wrong, when someone gets injured or killed, their families are left struggling financially and emotionally. The foundation helps with both, providing financial support for medical bills and lost wages, and connecting families with counseling and support groups." He spoke about pushing for better safety standards on every set he worked on, about refusing to pressure stunt coordinators to attempt anything they felt uncomfortable with, about walking away from projects that didn't take safety seriously enough. His commitment to this cause was clearly deep and personal, rooted entirely in what happened to Tommy. In some ways, Keanu reflected, losing Tommy changed the entire trajectory of my career. Before that accident, I was focused almost entirely on myself, My performance, my career growth, my next big role. Don't get me wrong, I cared about the people I worked with, but it was more superficial, more surface level. After Tommy died, I couldn't approach work the same way anymore. Every person on set became someone's husband or wife, someone's parent or child, someone precious and irreplaceable. The work mattered, but the people mattered infinitely more. One of the hosts asked how his perspective on life had changed beyond just his work. Everything changed, Keanu answered honestly. My relationships got deeper because I stopped taking them for granted. My appreciation for small moments intensified. A good conversation over coffee, a beautiful sunset, a genuine laugh with friends. These things that might have passed me by before suddenly became treasures. When you come that close to losing everything, when someone else actually does lose everything in your place, you can't help but see the world differently. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I also stopped worrying so much about the small stuff. The things that used to stress me out, bad reviews, career setbacks, what people thought of me, they just didn't carry the same weight anymore. Tommy died at 38 years old. He had so much life left to live, so many dreams he never got to fulfill. How could I waste the life he gave me by sweating over things that ultimately don't matter? So I try to keep perspective, try to focus on what's truly important. The audience was completely captivated. This wasn't the usual celebrity interview, where they promote their latest project and tell a few rehearsed anecdotes. This was real vulnerability, real wisdom, real humanity on display. Whoopi spoke up again, her voice steadier now, though still emotional. You've given us all so much to think about today. Not just about Tommy and your loss, but about how we move through the world, how we treat each other, how we approach every interaction. I know I'll be thinking about this for a long time. Thank you for that gift, even though it came from such a painful place. Pain often teaches us the most important lessons, Keanu responded. I wish I'd learned them another way. I wish Tommy was still here, teaching at his stunt school, watching his kids grow up, growing old with his wife. But I can't change what happened. All I can do is try to make meaning from it, try to ensure his death wasn't in vain, try to live in a way that honors his sacrifice. The show's producer signaled that they were running out of time, but it felt wrong to just end things casually. To transition to a commercial break like this had been just another segment. One of the hosts seemed to sense this too, and she spoke directly to the audience, both in the studio and at home. I think we all need a moment to process what we've just heard. These are the kinds of conversations that remind us why we do this show. Not for the laughs or the gossip or the entertainment value, though those things have their place, but for moments like this. Moments that make us think, that make us feel, that make us better people for having experienced them. The audience began to applaud. It started slowly, just a few people, but it built quickly into a standing ovation. Unlike the applause when Keanu first entered the studio, this wasn't celebratory or excited. This was respectful, reverent, a way of acknowledging something profound that had just taken place. Keanu stood up, and Whoopi stood with him. She stepped around the table and pulled him into a hug, and though their microphones didn't pick up what they said to each other, you could see Whoopi's shoulders shaking, see Keanu pat her back gently, see them hold on to each other for a long moment. The other hosts stood too, and there were more hugs, more quiet words, more tears. When Keanu finally left the set, he didn't just walk off quickly like most guests do. He stopped to shake hands with crew members, to say hello to audience members who approached him, to spend a genuine moment with each person who wanted to connect. Several people told him their own stories of loss, of carrying meaningful objects, of learning to live with grief. He listened to each one with the same attentiveness he'd shown during the interview, making everyone feel heard and valued. The segment aired later that week, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The video clip was shared millions of times across social media. News outlets wrote articles about it. Radio shows discussed it. The comment sections filled with people sharing their own stories about objects they carried, people they'd lost, moments that had changed their lives forever. But more than just going viral, the interview seemed to spark something larger. People reported being more thoughtful in their interactions, pausing before making jokes at others' expense, asking questions instead of making assumptions. Teachers showed the clip in classrooms to talk about empathy and kindness. Therapists discussed it with clients working through grief and loss, Whoopi addressed the interview again on the following episode of The View. "I want to say something about what happened last week," she began, her voice serious. "That moment with Keanu taught me something I needed to learn. I've built a career on being quick-witted, on observing things and commenting on them without a filter. Usually that serves the show well, but sometimes, as we all saw, it can lead to hurt. Not intentional hurt, but hurt nonetheless." She looked directly into the camera. "Keanu showed me grace that I'm not sure I deserved. But more importantly, he showed all of us how to handle mistakes with dignity, both the person who makes the mistake and the person who's hurt by it. He could have made me feel terrible. He could have walked out or called me out harshly. Instead, he used it as a teaching moment, for me and for everyone watching. That's real strength. That's real character.